Hey Mob, it's Chantal Thompson, the Barkentine Warrior, and in this episode, I wanted to have a yarn with you around why I started this podcast, Journey to Black Belt with Chantal Thompson, because for me, this is more of an audio log for me to log and track my journey towards Black Belt. And it's not just, as I said in the introduction, it's no longer just about my journey to Black Belt in Jiu-Jitsu. It's also evolving to encompass mapping my journey from brown belt to black belt in life, in culture, in self, in purpose, entrepreneurship, and jiu-jitsu. I started jiu-jitsu where I first found it when I was 19. I was getting into a lot of trouble on the streets. I was getting into fights. And for me, to provide some context, growing up as a fair-skinned Aboriginal girl and woman in regional New South Wales at a time where you were either black or white was not easy. It came with its own challenges. I was never black. I was never enough, meaning not black enough, not white enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough, not sporty enough. Or the other dominant message was too much, too black, too white, too loud, too aggressive, too needy, too loving. From a really young age, I have chosen to walk my own path. I don't walk into worlds. I weave my worlds together, whether that be motherhood, identity, culture, entrepreneurship, social justice, whatever it is, and all the things that make me a life weaver. I have always woven those things together. And the element that has always tied them together is coming from the heart. And my courage to, I guess, follow my ancestral calling or the calling from my heart has always been my way to, um, to I guess, for my knowing, my being and doing in the world. And jiu-jitsu came to me at a time when I wasn't really making the best choices. I grew up fighting, whether it be fighting to protect myself or others. From like at 6 years old, I was sexually abused by a family member, and members of my family chose to protect the perpetrator rather than protecting me as the child. I'm forever grateful to this day for my father for intervening and protecting me and taking care of me as best he could after that incident happened. And I'm very thankful that I only ever experienced one episode of that. So from that incident to protecting siblings in certain family violence situations and being the protector of them, to the schoolyard where I was getting into fights, whether it was with other Aboriginal kids for not being black enough, or white kids for racism, particularly boys. And this became a way of responding to the world. It was a way that I felt safe and of protecting myself, and it was my go-to behavior. However, as I got older, it started to become more self-destructive than protective. And when I was 19, someone suggested that I go and check out this martial arts called jiu-jitsu or karate. And I'd never had any interaction with any of those things prior to this. And with full disclosure, the week before I found this jiu-jitsu place, I had gone out to a nightclub and I was with my sisters or cousins, and there was this guy standing up the back in the corner of the nightclub, a security guard. And he was kind of there just shaking his ditty, having a bit of a dance and just smiling. And it really felt like instant sexual attraction, lust at first sight. And his eyes were so gentle and his smile was very sexy. And very soon it was love at first sight, which is now my husband, life partner, training partner, coach, father of my babies, biggest rock and supporter in life. And we've been together 19 years. He was also in this martial arts space when I first stepped in there. So curiosity, a calling, and a guy at the time called me to the mats. And that was kind of my first entry point into jiu-jitsu and martial arts. So to provide context, I was 19. I had very, I guess, violent ways of responding to the world, because that had been my go-to responses to trauma and situations of stress or fear. And that was also balanced out by this continuous path to having a voice for myself, to wanting to work with young people in some shape or form, and to always having this calling and this bigger purpose in my heart that where I was and the circumstances that I was in did not define who I was or the path or the journey or the life that I was going to have moving forward from that moment. And when I found jiu-jitsu and karate, it was like I found a part of myself. It was like I'd been given a key to unlock part of myself. And it provided healing, it provided structure. And I really fell in love with the concept of martial arts, of respect, of discipline, of humility, of community, because you can't train martial arts alone. It's not a solo endeavor. You need other people to train with, to practice with, to learn from, to spar with. You need coaches or people who are further ahead in the journey than you to learn from. And it really became a place for me to ground myself. And it was also at about this intersection of my journey that I also started to feel the call to learn more about my culture and to learn more about myself. And I wasn't a conscious thing at the time. It was more just me following my heart and my curiosity. And from 19 to 22, I was training. I got interested in MMA. I was at university. George and I were developing our relationship, and my mum got sick with cancer at that time, and life was really challenging on a few different levels. And then in 2006, George and I had our first child together, and I kind of just stepped away from training and stuff. It was more just I let go of my dreams of being an MMA fighter, and it was more just a fitness thing. So I'd probably go to the gym maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks. It wasn't anything serious. And then in 2009, I gave birth to twins. At no point in my journey with becoming a mother and with pregnancy and stuff like that did anyone talk to me about postnatal depression or the risks that I faced by virtue of being someone who had experienced sexual abuse, someone who had already had a significant amount of lived experience in trauma, but also the inherited trauma from my mum and her experiences, and my dad and my grandmother before that, because of epigenetics and all of that transgenerational trauma that was passed down. So I was at a very high risk of deep postnatal depression, but no one was talking to me about that. So when I had my twins, I was 25. I had a 2.5-year-old, and George and I were going through our own challenges in our relationship together and navigating life as parents and trying to figure out how to feed our family and do all of that sort of stuff. So by the time the twins were 12 months old, I was struggling severely with undiagnosed postnatal depression. I was having images of hurting the kids. I was having days of depressive states. Mind you, I was a high functioning depressive. So that meant that I was still like looking for work, or I was still showing up to the extent that I could. I didn't know how to ask for help, and it wasn't safe to ask for help because I was the person who was used to taking care of everyone else. As the third eldest of 18 siblings, as the oldest living with my dad after him and my stepmom separated when I was 12, being the woman of the house, all of these sort of things led to me not knowing how to ask for help, not knowing how to be supported. And that kind of compounded on top of the other challenges of I guess being under a lot of financial strain, parenting 3 young children, and just so many other intersections that compounded to create this moment one night where I was sitting with my twin baby daughter, and I didn't realize at the time that I'd slipped into having that vision of hurting her, but I was physically holding her, and it wasn't until her cries changed from discomfort to pain that I realized I'd started to act on that vision by squeezing her. And it was at that exact moment that George, my husband, walked through the door, because he'd just finished night shift working at a local food place. And to be honest, I'm so grateful to this day that I never have to find out what would have happened if he hadn't have come through the door at that moment. In that moment, I gave him the baby, grabbed the car keys, and I took off. No phone, no word of what had happened. And I left, and I ended up finding myself somehow at the doctor's office. This was about 5 o'clock in the morning. I had to wait 3 to 4 hours to see a female GP. A lot of stuff was going on at this point, and she was the first person I told anything. She was the first person. It was the first time I'd articulated or expressed out loud what I had been experiencing. And her first response to me in that moment, after I'd shared the visions that I was having and the fact that I was scared, her first response was that she noticed on my file I was of Indigenous heritage, and she wanted to do a welfare check on my children by calling Child Protection and the police, and wanted to suggest or recommend that I spend time in a mental health facility. Now, if you have any awareness or context of the history of this country and the removal of Aboriginal children from their families, this was one of the dominant reasons as to why I hadn't gone for help prior to this situation. And to have this unfold in front of me after the incident I just had, I lost it. I was so triggered. I was in a state that I just can't explain or don't have the words to articulate. And in that moment, I took off, and I was driving in my car, and I was driving to my sister's place with the hope that she would, I guess, I don't know, something just drove me to go to her place. As I was driving, the thoughts that were going through my head was, even if the doctor thinks that I'm a risk to my family, maybe I'm better off not being here. Because for me, the idea of hurting my children was devastating to me, because one of the biggest things in my life was all I'd ever wanted to be was be a mum, and to be the type of mum to my children that hadn't been available to me. As I got to a roundabout, a truck was coming, and I thought, maybe I'm better off not being here. And I remember the feeling of the pedal of the car, the accelerator going down. Like, I pressed it all the way to the floor, and the car didn't move. The truck went past, and I was just left dazed. The car behind me honked and kind of brought me back to the moment, and I drove through the roundabout into my sister's. And in that moment, I guess something surfaced in me that maybe I'm meant to be here. It wasn't all conscious at that point, but there were these unconscious things, and I guess the ancestors were wrapping support around me to protect me in that moment. And I went to my sister's, and from there we went back to my house to tell George everything that had happened. And the biggest thing from those moments that kind of still stands out to me is the relief on their faces, because I'd finally said something. I guess people had sensed something was wrong, but no one had really known how to approach me or talk to me about it. And from that, I learned that no one can help you until you're ready to help yourself. And it can be just by being aware can be the first step. And it was in those preceding moments that happened, and I was like, I don't want to do medication, because my family had history of addiction issues, and we were talking back and forwards, and it was George's suggestion that I go back to jiu-jitsu or go back to the gym and lifting weights and things like that, and just doing physical exercise for fitness didn't appeal to me. So I decided to go back to jiu-jitsu. And that first night on the mats, I just didn't want to be there. but I also knew that I didn't want to harm my children, as a promise, a sacred promise I'd made to myself, and to my future children, was that I didn't want to do harm, and that I would do everything that was within my power to ensure that they didn't become victims of my trauma, to the best of my ability. Now, obviously, that incident happened, but I really was doing things to the best of my ability with the time and the resources and who I was. I have a saying that you start from where you are with what you have and who you are. And that's really what I was doing at that point. The first couple of weeks of jiu-jitsu were a battle to just get out the door, to organize babysitter and stuff. But my children were the first grandchildren, so it wasn't too hard to get babysitters at that point, with lots of aunties and uncles and grandparents around. I would go to the gym and I'd just be empty, but I'd also be filled with rage or this disassociation. But when I left, I felt empty in a different way. It was like I was at peace, and I just had space in my heart, in my body, and my mind, because I'd released the stored energy that was sitting in my body. And I was able to find space. And this went on for a couple of months. And then one day I was sitting in the lounge room, and the twins were just kind of propped up on pillows watching TV. And I remember one of them looking over their shoulder and looking at me and smiling. And it was like someone had taken off a dark pair of glasses, and it was like I could see for the first time. And I fell in love with my babies. Now, I've always loved my children, but being in love with them is a very different thing. And we're given this Hollywood style of parenting and motherhood, that you're intrinsically meant to be in love with your child automatically. No one talks about the fact that falling in love, even with your own child, something as a woman, that you've grown in your body and brought into the world, life into the world, that it can sometimes be a process of falling in love with that little being and finding your relationship together, your connection, and nurturing that. And sometimes it takes time. And I felt guilt. To this day, I still don't remember the twins' first birthday. I need to go and look at photos and video footage, because I was so stuck in the trauma and the illness at the time, that there's certain things that just I don't remember. It's almost like I have amnesia. And my healing journey continued. And then about 3 or 4 months into training, coach was like, we're going to head to South Australian state titles. Who wants to come and compete as a team? And I was curious. I knew at that time that I knew how to fight on the streets, that I could protect myself, or that I was capable of handling myself in a street situation. But what I was really curious about was, how would I handle myself in a controlled environment? Could I control my mindset? Could I come at the match with technique and channeling my energy and utilizing all of those feelings and emotions to be constructive and to create something rather than be destructive? So I signed up with George, and I signed up for the South Australian state titles. I think it was 2011. And I was nervous as shit. I still remember my body was just this massive feelings and nerves. And I was excited, and I was like, the other woman has signed up for the same thing. Like, we are here to win. We are here to battle it out. And I really found an arena that worked for me to process, to find myself. And I ended up winning 2 state titles that day. And there was I think there was 4 females in total. It was a life-changing, it was a defining marker in my journey. And from there, I fell in love with competition, and that being a vehicle for self-expression and just a way to show up in the world. And that meant that was the start of my journey. And now with this podcast, and I guess I'll go more into my journey in another episode, because there's a lot to unpack. But where I sit now in September 2022 is I've been I started my martial arts journey at 19. I've been full-time in martial arts since 2011. So 11 years now. And I'm a brown belt. At the start of this year, I had considered retirement from jiu-jitsu, and not from jiu-jitsu, but from competition, because to provide some context, I am based in regional Victoria. I have 6 children. I run a foundation and I have other businesses. My children compete. George is now a black belt. Our oldest daughter is a juvenile blue belt and has started creating an international career for herself. And my business funds that, or funds most part of it, or her first trip was funded half by us and half by sponsorship and the support of Mildura BJJ and Luke Burnham, the gym where we train, and their generosity to support Zinni to get to America and George to go as her coach. I competed in February at Nationals to see if this was a journey that I still wanted to take. I had 3 questions. Do I still want to do this? Can I be competitive at a national level? And do I still have the level of jiu-jitsu to be in this space, or the energy or the desire to do it? And yeah, the answer is yes. Like, I was able to compete and hold my own at a national level. I still felt the need, the fire to compete, and my body held up. So I started to play with the idea of making a comeback to my jiu-jitsu career. And then my daughter competed at Worlds in the end of May this year. And sitting at home, watching her on TV, being at home with the 3 other kids, I was filled with pride, sadness, jealousy, resentment, anger, all at the same time. Now, what I took with those feelings and sitting with them was the knowledge that obviously my jiu-jitsu career is important enough to me that I still wanted to compete. But that means that I have to figure out a way to support that part of my life in a way that doesn't cause financial strain to my family. As the main income earner for my family, with the support of George taking on the full-time role at home, it means that my family need to be provided for. Because of my career prior to COVID, we have no financial assets. We have we have no savings. Our superannuation got depleted for different purposes. So I really am starting from scratch in terms of building up assets and resources to support my family. We don't own a home yet. So on paper, living in regional Victoria, 6 kids, 3 businesses, my daughter and my whole family competing is really expensive. Into having an international career, going into senior levels of education. On paper, it just doesn't make sense. It's not realistic or logical. And there's so many things that point against it in terms of me returning to a competitive international career as opposed to doing jiu-jitsu recreationally and for self-development. However, I've always been the type of person who only needs one reason to try, and I only need one thing to move me to want to say yes to the journey, and just taking the next step and going, okay, well, if this is what I want, I guess now it's about accepting that that's what I want, going all in and taking one step at a time to figure it out. That's how I made my journey from starting jiu-jitsu, from, I guess, going from suicide to world champion. The first step in that journey was stepping on the mats. And then that's how the journey progressed, was one step at a time. Where that now leads me is to being a brown belt, starting again with my jiu-jitsu effectively, and just really trying to map the journey. But it was a few weeks ago when I was training in Sydney that I was in a gym, and it was kind of my first, or not first, but it was the first class that I'd really allowed myself to have an elite training session, where I went in with the mindset of being an elite athlete and that I was here to train. And there's a difference. Like when I step on the mats, sometimes it's for play and therapy, sometimes it's for fun and to be a role model for others. And then there's the other times that I'm there to be the Bark and G warrior. I'm there to train, to get better, to progress, to prepare myself for the next competition. And none of these people in this gym knew me. It was an elite gym. There were about 20 on the mat, a lot of high-level belts. So I decided to challenge myself and step into the Bark-and-Jew warrior energy, and that I was here to train. And I ended up pulling a move on a guy who was in his 20s, probably about 90 kilos or so. And I ended up doing a jiu-jitsu takedown, which is like a sacrifice throw, and was successful in this move against someone who was younger, stronger, fitter, and more advanced in their technique than me in the holistically. And I really took away from that this is the journey that I'm on. And I started to get this concept of what does it look like to move from brown belt to black belt in jiu-jitsu. And for me, jiu-jitsu has always woven into other areas of my life. It's impacted who I am as a person. It's impacted my business, because obviously you get insights and learnings from being a female in a male-dominated sport and being a self-funded athlete, being a mum. There's so many different elements that weave together to bring those moments together. So I started to get curious around what does it look like to move from brown belt to black belt in life, in jiu-jitsu, in culture, in myself as a woman. And that's why I decided to start this podcast, is more to log my journey. So on a Sunday, getting the discipline to sit down and go, right, what are my intentions for the week? Where's my energy at? What's going on for me in life, internally and externally? And using that to really set my intentions for the week. Because the reality is, with where I'm at the moment, I don't have a consistent training routine, because every week I'm away. I'm either in Melbourne or Sydney, or there's other stuff going on. So for me, it's about going, right, I can train twice a week jiu-jitsu. That's doable. That's accessible. I can do 2 days a week of strength and conditioning. I know enough to do stuff for myself, whether it be body weight or using whatever resources I've got, and 2 sessions of stretching, because that's going to be a really important part of my longevity, is creating a new relationship with mobility and flexibility, to lay the foundations for my body to be able to get to an elite level where it can handle the training. And it's not about training more. It's about using the resources and the time that I have to be focused and disciplined. So the Sunday is about setting those intentions and sharing that. And then on a Saturday or a Sunday, coming back to what have been the lessons of that week, what's been the progress, what action have I taken or not taken, and diving a little into that. What has been the experiences, the wisdoms or insights? And it's really just an audio log, it's an audio log for me to log my journey, more for myself. And if other people find value in this, then that's amazing too. And I'm really excited to kind of see where this new mindset and, I guess, vehicle for self-actualization through jiu-jitsu, through culture, through purpose, through self, and through social entrepreneurship and jiu-jitsu really takes me. And what does it actually look like? So what does it look like for me? What does success or an outcome look like for me that I'm using as a marker in my journey? So for jiu-jitsu, it would be moving from brown belt to black belt, but it's more nuanced than that. So it would be redefining my game. So at a technical level, it would be understanding what is my game, what are the pieces that are missing to create a holistic game that makes me competitive at an international level. So that requires me to actually do a couple of competitions. So I've got some footage and some things to work with around what's my starting point. Figuring out who are my coaches and guides in this journey, because George and Luke run the gym at home. George is also my partner. So it's about working in with, but also who do I go to when I'm in Melbourne and Sydney, as I spend a significant amount of my week or time in those spaces. And what are the competitions that I'm going to be using to track my progress and start to build my elite pathway again? So there's that. What does a fitness or a conditioning routine regime look like to build my body up to a point where I can shed the baby weight, I can rebuild my muscle memory, build mobility and core strength so that I can actually do jiu-jitsu. And then what's the mindset required to show up consistently, be intentional, disciplined, and also be prepared and ready to step on the mats at an international level. And then how am I going to fund the damn thing? Because it's expensive. I don't have the resources or the time to be a full-time athlete. So what will it take, whether it be sponsorship, building my business, and building those two things, weaving those two things together in a way that allows me to replace or supplement my CEO income so that I can actually afford to do jiu-jitsu and compete and support my family. It means bringing in staff into Kilalana and the businesses to support our delivery so that I can play a different role in terms of the role that I play in the businesses. In business, the journey from brown belt to black belt is getting really clear on my business model, getting all my website up and running, my systems and processes in place so I can have an amazing client experience. And it's really getting more clear and consistent on my marketing, my branding, and what it is that I do, but also more importantly, what it is I don't do and how am I showing up in that space and what's my delivery. So in business, I would put myself at about a blue or a purple belt. So even though I'm aiming towards black belt, the journey for me is about getting clear on my vision. What are my numbers? Making a relationship with those things, putting in place the systems, employing the staff or the contractors that I need to move the business forward to the level businesses. So I've got Kilalana, the company, Kilalana, the foundation, and then I've got Chantel Thompson, the thought leader, storyteller, and then you've got the Bark-and-Jiu warrior, the athlete, the motivation, inspiration. So it's those four elements weaving together. And what does that business model actually look like? And then with my culture, it's around who am I in my culture? What role and knowledge do I want to hold to be able to use in my life and through my business and my teaching? And what do I also want to pass on to my children? So actually creating time in my life and my schedule and my week to learn my culture in a way that wasn't available to my mum or my grandmother or my great-grandmother and my grandfathers. And my dad's not Indigenous, but my mum's line. And what calls to me, because obviously I don't have the time or the space to learn everything. So what is it that I'm really called to learn, which is more about our spirituality, our storytelling, our women's business, and our healing kind of practices. That's the stuff that really calls to me. In purpose and being purpose-led, it's really doing the inner work to understand who I am, what are my gifts, what is it that I feel called to do and share in the world, and how do I bring that to life? In myself, it's the warrior heart stuff. It's standing in my power, being my truth, and following my heart. And weaving those things together. So that's what this is going to be about. I'll be sharing insights and wisdom and knowledge and stories. I may even bring in other martial artists to share their journey around their journey in life, their martial arts and business or their professional careers and what that's actually meant for them in their journey to black belt. So sharing the story of other people who have journeyed to black belt, particularly women or people who have families, because the intersection of those things is quite nuanced in terms of what it requires to be able to show up to the mat, work towards something like a black belt while having a family and a career or a business. And what's required to do that, I think, will provide some really interesting space to share, to learn from others, and to be inspired and empowered to do things differently. Big love you, Mob, and I look forward to sharing more of this journey with you.